Skilla. Enhancing Careers. Chapter 6. Inco Terms. What are Inco Terms? International commercial terms or Incoterms are a series of sales terms that are used by businesses throughout the world. The Incoterms rules are an internationally recognized standard and are used worldwide in international and domestic contracts for the sale of goods. Incoterms rules provide internationally accepted definitions and rules of interpretation for most common commercial terms. There are 13 Incoterms that are used by businesses and are used in 4 different areas. They are used to divide transaction costs and responsibilities between buyer and seller. Incoterms also deal with the documentation required for global trade, specifying which parties are responsible for which documents. The Incoterms or International Commercial Terms are a series of predefined commercial terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, that are widely used in international commercial transactions. A series of 3-letter trade terms related to common contractual sales practices, the Incoterms rules are intended primarily to clearly communicate the tasks, costs, and risks associated with the transportation and delivery of goods. Need of Incoterms. Language is one of the most complex and important tools of international trade. As in any complex and sophisticated business, small changes in wording can have a major impact on all aspects of a business agreement. For business terminology to be effective, phrases must mean the same thing throughout the industry. Incoterms were created primarily for people inside the world of global trade. Seemingly common words such as responsibility and delivery have different meanings in global trade than they do in other situations. That is why the International Chamber of Commerce created Incoterms in 1936. Who created Incoterms? The rules have been developed and maintained by experts and practitioners brought together by ICC and have become the standard in international business rule setting. Incoterms have been updated 6 times to reflect the developments in international trade. Incoterms are designed to create a bridge between different members of the industry by acting as a uniform language they can use. Benefits of Incoterms. Incoterms are used to make international trade easier. They help traders avoid costly misunderstandings by clarifying the tasks, costs and risks involved in the delivery of goods from sellers to buyers. They are intended to reduce or remove altogether uncertainties arising from different interpretation of the rules in different countries. As such, they are regularly incorporated into sales contracts worldwide. Acceptance of Incoterms. Incoterms rules are recognized by UNCITRAL as the global standard for the interpretation of the most common terms in foreign trade. The Incoterms rules are accepted by governments, legal authorities, and practitioners worldwide for the interpretation of most commonly used terms in international trade. Details of Incoterms. Each Incoterm refers to a type of agreement for the purchase and shipping of goods internationally. There are 11 different terms, each of which helps users deal with different situations involving the movement of goods. For example, the term FCA is often used with shipments involving row/row or container transport. Incoterms are most frequently listed by category. Terms beginning with F refer to shipments where the primary cost of shipping is not paid for by the seller. Terms beginning with C deal with shipments where the seller pays for shipping. E-terms occur when a seller's responsibilities are fulfilled when goods are ready to depart from their facilities. D-terms cover shipments where the shipper/seller's responsibility ends when the goods arrive at some specific point. Because shipments are moving into a country, D-terms usually involve the services of a customs broker and a freight forwarder. In addition, D-terms also deal with the pier or docking charges found at virtually all ports and determining who is responsible for each charge. EXW, Ex Works, named place of delivery. The seller makes the goods available at its premises. The buyer is responsible for uploading. This term places the maximum obligation on the buyer and minimum obligations on the seller. The Ex Works term is often used when making an initial quotation for the sale of goods without any costs included. EXW means that a seller has the goods ready for collection at his premises, works, factory, warehouse, plant, on the date agreed upon. The buyer pays all transportation costs and also bears the risks for bringing the goods to their final destination. The seller doesn't load the goods on collecting vehicles and doesn't clear them for export. If the seller does load the good, he does so at buyer's risk and cost. If parties wish seller to be responsible for the loading of the goods on departure and to bear the risk and all costs of such loading, this must be made clear by adding explicit wording to this effect in the contract of sale. FCA, free carrier, named place of delivery. The seller hands over the goods, cleared for export, into the disposal of the first carrier, named by the buyer, at the named place. The buyer pays for carriage to the named point of delivery, and risk passes when the goods are handed over to the first carrier. CPT, carriage paid to, named place of destination. The seller pays for carriage. Risk transfers to buyer upon handing goods over to the first carrier at place of shipment in the country of export. CIP, carriage and insurance paid to, named place of destination. The containerized transport/multimodal equivalent of CIF. Seller pays for carriage and insurance to the named destination point, but risk passes when the goods are handed over to the first carrier. DAT, delivered at terminal, named terminal at port or place of destination. DAP, delivered at place, named place of destination. Seller pays for carriage to the terminal, except for costs related to import clearance, and assumes all risks up to the point that the goods are unloaded at the terminal. DDP, delivered duty paid, named place of destination. Seller is responsible for delivering the goods to the named place in the country of the buyer, and pays all costs in bringing the goods to the destination including import duties and taxes. The buyer is responsible for unloading. This term is often used in place of the non-Inco term, free in store (FIS). This term places the maximum obligations on the seller and minimum obligations on the buyer. Sea and inland waterway transport. The four rules defined by Inco Terms 2010 for international trade where transportation is entirely conducted by water are: FAS, free alongside ship, named port of shipment. The seller must place the goods alongside the ship at the named port. The seller must clear the goods for export. Suitable only for maritime transport but not for multimodal sea transport in containers. This term is typically used for heavy lift or bulk cargo. FOB, free on board, named port of shipment. The seller must load the goods on board the vessel nominated by the buyer. Cost and risk are divided when the goods are actually on board of the vessel. The seller must clear the goods for export. The term is applicable for maritime and inland waterway transport only but not for multimodal sea transport in containers. The buyer must instruct the seller the details of the vessel and the port where the goods are to be loaded, and there is no reference to, or provision for, the use of a carrier or forwarder. This term has been greatly misused over the last 3 decades ever since Inco Terms 1980 explained that FCA should be used for container shipment. It means, the seller pays for transportation of goods to the port of shipment, loading cost. The buyer pays cost of marine freight transportation, insurance, uploading and transportation cost from the arrival port to destination. The passing of risk occurs when the goods pass the ship's rail at port of shipment. CFR, cost and freight, named port of destination. Seller must pay the costs and freight to bring the goods to the port of destination. However, risk is transferred to the buyer once the goods are loaded on the vessel. Insurance for the goods is not included. This term is formerly known as CNF. Maritime transport only. CIF, cost, insurance and freight, named port of destination. Exactly the same as CFR except that the seller must in addition procure and pay for the insurance. Maritime transport only. DAF, delivered at frontier, named place of delivery. This term can be used when the goods are transported by rail and road. The seller pays for transportation to the named place of delivery at the frontier. The buyer arranges for customs clearance and pays for transportation from the frontier to his factory. The passing of risk occurs at the frontier. DES, delivered ex-ship, named port of delivery. Where goods are delivered ex-ship, the passing of risk does not occur until the ship has arrived at the named port of destination and the goods made available for unloading to the buyer. The seller pays the same freight and insurance costs as he would under a CIF arrangement. Unlike CFR and CIF terms, the seller has agreed to bear not just cost, but also risk and title up to the arrival of the vessel at the named port. Costs for unloading the goods and any duties, taxes, etc., are for the buyer. A commonly used term in shipping bulk commodities, such as coal, grain, dry chemicals, and where the seller either owns or has chartered their own vessel. DEQ, delivered ex-quay, named port of delivery. This is similar to DES, but the passing of risk does not occur until the goods have been unloaded at the port of destination. DDU, delivered duty unpaid, named place of destination. This term means that the seller delivers the goods to the buyer to the named place of destination in the contract of sale. A transaction in international trade where the seller is responsible for making a safe delivery of goods to a named destination, paying all transportation expenses but not the duty. The seller bears the risks and costs associated with supplying the good to the delivery location, where the buyer becomes responsible for paying the duty and other customers' clearing expenses.